The silence of the gravel driveway was deafening. Leora stood on the porch of the farmhouse she had grown up in, her eyes scanning the horizon for the flatbed semi-trucks that were supposed to be here an hour ago. 2 brand new John Deere 8 R410s over $750,000 in machinery were the only things standing between the Blackwood family and bankruptcy this harvest season. She dialed the dealership, her heart hammering against her ribs. When the sales manager picked up, his voice wasn't celebratory. It was apologetic. "Leora, I don't know how to tell you this. The trucks aren't coming. Frank called me this morning. He cancelled the entire order." Leora dropped the phone. The betrayal wasn't just business. It was blood. The heat in western Nebraska in late July wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical weight. It pressed down on the corn stalks, turning the soil into concrete and testing the resolve of anyone foolish enough to farm it. For Leora Blackwood, the heat was the least of her worries. She stood in the middle of the machine shed, wiping grease from her forehead with a rag that was already blacker than the oil pan she'd been wrestling with. In front of her sat the beast, a 20-year-old Case IH Steiger that had been the pride of the farm when she was in elementary school. Now it was a money pit. A hydraulic line had burst for the 3rd time this month, spewing hot fluid all over the shop floor and putting them 2 days behind on the pre-harvest prep. "Damn it," Leora whispered, throwing the wrench onto the metal workbench. It landed with a clang that echoed through the cavernous metal building. She was 32 years old, armed with a degree in ag business from the University of Nebraska, and she was currently fighting a losing war against obsolescence. Her father, Frank Blackwood, sat in the farmhouse office, clutching the ledger books like they were sacred texts, refusing to acknowledge that the world of farming had moved on since 1995. Leora walked out of the shed and toward the house. The dust kicked up by her boots settled on her jeans, a constant reminder of the drought they were fighting. The farm, Blackwood Acres, spanned 4,000 acres of prime corn and soybean ground. On paper, they were millionaires. In reality, they were cash poor and leverage heavy. She found Frank where he always was, sitting at the heavy oak desk that had belonged to his father Silas. The air conditioning in the house hummed a stark contrast to the brutal heat outside. Frank didn't look up when she entered. He was staring at a grain market report on his ancient desktop computer. "The Steiger is down again. Dad," Leora said, leaning against the doorframe. She didn't shout. She didn't have the energy left. Frank grunted, adjusting his glasses. "It's a busted hose, Leora. Fix it. Don't come in here telling me problems tell me it's fixed." "It's not just a hose, Frank," she said, dropping the dad to get his attention. "The transmission is slipping in 3rd gear. The GPS receiver is obsolete and won't sync with the new planters. We are bleeding efficiency. Every hour that tractor sits in the shed is an hour we aren't prepping the northern section. If we don't get the nitrogen down before the next rain, if it ever rains, our yield is going to tank." Frank finally swiveled his chair around. He was a hard man, weathered by 60 years of wind and sun. His eyes were the color of flint and just as hard. "We make do. That's what we do. We don't spend money we don't have on shiny toys just because the neighbors are upgrading." "It's not about shiny toys." Leora walked into the room, slamming her hand on the desk. "It's about survival. I ran the numbers. If we trade in the Steiger and the old 8000 series plus the tax incentives for this fiscal year, we can lease 2 new John Deere 8Rs. The dealer, Rick at Ag Power, worked out a deal. 0% financing for 60 months. It cuts our fuel costs by 20%. It increases our uptime by 40%. It pays for itself in 3 harvests." Frank shook his head, a dismissive smirk playing on his lips. "Rick, That snake would sell a drowning man a glass of water. You don't sign contracts with men like Rick unless you want to lose your shirt. I'm not asking you, Dad, Leora said, her voice trembling slightly. This was the moment she had been building up to for 6 months. I'm telling you, you made me operations manager. You gave me the authority to handle equipment procurement. I signed the purchase order this morning. The silence in the room was heavier than the heat outside. Frank stared at her, his face unreadable. For a moment, Leora thought he might explode. He had a temper that was legendary in the county. But instead, he went quiet. Dangerously quiet. You signed? He asked softly. I did. Leora stood her ground. 2 John Deere 8R410s, fully loaded. Precision ag tech included. They deliver on Thursday. We're going to have the best harvest this farm has seen in a decade, but we need the equipment to do it. Frank looked down at his hands, calloused and scarred. You think you know better than me, Leora. You think that degree makes you a farmer. I think that degree teaches me how to read a balance sheet. And right now, our maintenance costs are eating our profit margin alive, she retorted. Trust me on this. Please. Let me bring this farm into the 21st century. Frank sighed a long, rattling sound in his chest. He looked defeated, or maybe just tired. He waved a hand dismissively. Do what you want. You always do anyway. But if you sink this farm, Leora, if you put us in a hole we can't climb out of, that's on your head, not mine. Leora felt a rush of relief wash over her. It wasn't a blessing, but it wasn't a no. In the Blackwood household, that was as good as a victory. I won't let you down. You'll see. When those deers roll into the yard, you'll see. She left the office, feeling like she had just won a prize fight. She went straight to the phone in the kitchen and called Rick at the dealership. It's a go, she told him, grinning. Lock it in. Delivery Thursday morning. 8 a.m. sharp. Rick's voice boomed on the other end. Music to my ears, Leora. You made the right choice. Those machines are beasts. I'll have the boys prep them tonight. We'll even throw in the ceramic coating on the cab glass on the house. Leora hung up, feeling a weight lift off her shoulders. She imagined the 2 green giants rolling down the driveway, the smell of new plastic and diesel, the sheer power of modern engineering. She visualized the harvest, smooth, efficient, profitable. She was finally taking the reins. She was finally saving the farm. She didn't notice that the door to the office was slightly ajar. She didn't see Frank pick up the landline extension the moment she hung up. She didn't hear the heavy, labored breathing of a man who felt his legacy slipping through his fingers, a man who had never lost control of anything in his life and wasn't about to start now. Thursday morning arrived with a clear blue sky, the kind that promised a scorcher by noon. Leora had been up since 4 a.m. She couldn't sleep. The anticipation was electric. Today was the day Blackwood Acres turned the corner. She had spent the previous day clearing out the main bay of the machine shed. She had even pressure-washed the concrete floor. She wanted the new tractors to have a clean home. She told the hired hands, Mike and Toby, to be ready at 7:30. She wanted them briefed on the new controls immediately. By 7:45 a.m., Leora was pacing the front porch, a mug of black coffee in her hand. Mike and Toby were leaning against their pickups, smoking cigarettes and looking skeptical. They were old-school guys loyal to Frank, and they viewed Leora's college ideas with a mixture of amusement and annoyance. You really think these fancy computers are going to handle the mud in the bottoms? Mike asked, spitting on the ground. They aren't just computers, Mike, Leora said, checking her watch. They have better traction control than anything we've ever owned. You'll be able to work that bottom ground without tearing up the soil structure, if you say so, boss. Mike smirked. 8 a.m. came and went. Leora frowned. Rick was usually punctual. In the farming world, time was money. If you said 8 o'clock, you meant 7:55. 8:15 a.m. Maybe they got stuck at the way station on the highway, Leora muttered, mostly to herself. She pulled out her cell phone and checked for messages. Nothing. 8:30 a.m. The pit in her stomach started to form. It was a cold, hard knot of anxiety. She looked toward the house. Frank hadn't come out yet. Usually he was up with the sun patrolling the yard, finding something to complain about. The blinds in the living room were drawn tight. "I'm going to call 'em," Leora announced. She dialed Rick's cell number. It went straight to voicemail. She dialed the main dealership line. The receptionist, a sweet old lady named Martha, picked up. "Ag Power, this is Martha." "Hey Martha, it's Leora Blackwood. I'm just wondering where the transport is. We've got the bay ready and the coffee brewing, but no green paint in sight." There was a pause on the line. A long, uncomfortable pause. "Oh, Leora. Hold on a moment, honey. Let me get Rick. He should talk to you." The hold music was an upbeat country song that grated on Leora's nerves. Why did she need to talk to Rick? The trucks should be here. Finally, the line clicked. "Leora." Rick's voice sounded strained. Gone was the boisterous salesman from 2 days ago. He sounded like a man walking to the gallows. "Rick, where are my tractors? My guys are standing around on the clock." "Leora, look, I don't know how to tell you this," Rick stammered. "The trucks aren't coming." Leora froze. "What do you mean they aren't coming? Did they break down? Is there a delay?" "No." Rick sighed. "There's no delay. The order was cancelled." Leora laughed, a short, confused bark of a sound. "Cancelled? What are you talking about? I signed the papers. I sent over the financing approval. You said it was a done deal." "It was," Rick said. "But your father called yesterday afternoon, about an hour after we spoke." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Leora gripped the porch railing with her free hand. "Frank called you?" "Yeah, he came down here, actually, in person." Rick lowered his voice. "Leora, he caused a scene. He came into the showroom and demanded to see the general manager. He claimed you weren't authorized to sign for that amount of debt. He said if we delivered those tractors, he'd sue us for predatory lending and report us to the corporate office for exploiting an incompetent junior partner." The words hit Leora like a physical slap. Incompetent junior partner. "He voided the contract." Rick continued, his voice sympathetic but firm. "He's the majority shareholder, Leora. His name is first on the LLC documents. Legally, he has veto power on any capital expenditure over $50,000. We couldn't stop him. I tried to call you last night, but he told me that if I contacted you, he'd pull all his service contracts for the existing fleet too." Leora felt the blood drain from her face. She looked at the closed blinds of the farmhouse. The silence from inside wasn't because Frank was sleeping. It was because he was hiding. No, not hiding, waiting. "He cancelled it," Leora whispered. "I'm sorry, Leora. Really. I wanted to sell you those units, but my hands are tied." Leora ended the call without saying goodbye. The phone felt like a brick in her hand. She looked up at Mike and Toby. They were watching her, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. "Go home," Leora said, her voice hollow. "What?" Mike asked. "Send the crew home. There's nothing to unload. The tractors aren't coming." As the men packed up, confused and muttering, Leora turned toward the house. The shock was fading, replaced by a white-hot rage she had never felt before. It wasn't just about the tractors. It was the public humiliation. It was the fact that he had gone behind her back to the dealership, questioning her competence to the people she had to do business with for the rest of her career. He hadn't just cancelled an order, he had nuked her reputation. She stormed up the steps and threw open the front door. The cool air of the house hit her smelling of stale coffee and old paper. "Frank!" she screamed. She didn't find him in the office. She found him in the kitchen, calmly buttering a piece of toast. He didn't look up as she burst in, her chest heaving. "You cancelled them," she accused, her voice shaking. "You went to Ag Power and humiliated me." Frank took a bite of his toast, chewing slowly. He took a sip of coffee before finally looking at her. His expression was terrifyingly calm. "I saved this farm from your recklessness." "Recklessness? We have equipment that is 20 years old. We are losing money every single day we operate that junk." "We own that junk," Frank said, slamming his hand on the table. "It is paid for. I will not have this farm leveraged up to its eyeballs to pay for air-conditioned cabs and satellite radios so you can play pretend farmer. I am not playing," Leora yelled, tears of frustration stinging her eyes. "I am trying to ensure there is a farm left to inherit. Why would you do this behind my back? Why didn't you just tell me no?" Frank stood up. He was shorter than he used to be, gravity taking its toll, but he still loomed over her. "Because you don't listen, Leora. You think you're smarter than me because you went to college. You think you can solve everything with debt. I built this place from nothing. My father left me dirt and debt, and I turned it into an empire. I will not let you destroy it." "I have the authority," Leora argued. The operating agreement says whatever I say it says," Frank roared. "I am the majority owner. I am your father. And as long as I draw breath, no green tractor sits in my shed unless I say so. You want to run things? Then you wait until I'm in the ground. Until then, you drive the Steiger. Or you don't drive at all." Leora stared at him. She saw a man she didn't recognize. This wasn't just stubbornness. This was fear. Paranoid, irrational fear. "Fine," Leora said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "Fine. You want to run it your way? You want to rely on the iron tomb out there. Then you do it. But when the transmission on the Steiger blows for good, and it will probably this week, don't call me. Because I'm done fixing your mistakes." She turned to leave, but Frank's voice stopped her. "Where are you going?" "I'm going to town," she said, not looking back. "I need to apologize to Rick for having a father who is stuck in the last century. And then, I'm going to think about whether I even want to be a part of this family anymore." She slammed the door, leaving Frank alone in the kitchen. But as the echo of the slam faded, Frank didn't go back to his toast. He slumped into the chair, clutching his chest, a grimace of pain twisting his face. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled letter he had received 3 days ago, a letter Leora hadn't seen. It wasn't a bill. It was a notice from the bank. A notice of default on a loan Frank had taken out 2 years ago to cover bad investments in cattle futures. He hadn't cancelled the tractors because he hated technology. He cancelled them because the credit check would have revealed the truth. Blackwood Acres was technically already bankrupt, and he would rather his daughter hate him for being a tyrant than know he was a failure. The following Monday, the heat wave broke records. It was 104 degrees in the shade, and the humidity coming off the cornfield made the air feel like boiling soup. Leora sat inside the cab of the KCH Steiger, the machine she had begged her father to trade in. The air conditioning in the cab had quit an hour ago. The compressor had seized with a squeal that sounded like a dying animal, and now the interior was a glass oven. Leora had the windows open, but it didn't help. Dust, thick and choking, swirled into the cab with every gust of wind, coating her sweat-drenched skin in a layer of grime. The noise was deafening, the roar of the engine, the rattle of loose panels, and the grinding whine of the transmission that she knew in her bones was on borrowed time. She was pulling a deep ripper, trying to break up the hard-panned soil in the south quarter before the elusive rain arrived. It was brutal work for a new machine. For this 20-year-old dinosaur, it was a death march. Every time she shifted gears, the tractor lurched. A warning light for the hydraulic temperature flickered on the dashboard, glowing an angry red. Leora slammed her fist against the console. "Come on!" she screamed over the engine noise, her voice raw. "Just finish the row. Just finish the damn row." Her mind wasn't on the field, though. It was back in town at the dealership. She had driven to Ag Power on Friday, determined to salvage her professional relationship with Rick. The meeting had been excruciating. Rick hadn't been angry. He had been pitying. That was worse. "I didn't mean to cause a family rift, Leora," Rick had said, leaning back in his leather chair. He looked uncomfortable, shifting his gaze away from hers. "It's not your fault, Rick," Leora had replied, nursing a cup of stale dealership coffee. "Frank is Frank. He's stuck in his ways. He thinks debt is a sin, even if it's good debt." Rick had hesitated then. He picked up a pen and twirled it nervously. "Leora, look, I shouldn't say this. Client confidentiality and all that. But I've known you since you were a kid coming in here to buy toy tractors." "What is it?" Leora asked, sensing a shift in the air. "It wasn't just Frank's temper," Rick said quietly. "When we ran the preliminary credit check for the lease, the one Frank authorized you to do initially, it came back flagged." Leora frowned. "Flagged? What do you mean we have perfect credit? We pay our suppliers on net 30 terms, always." "The farm's operational credit is fine," Rick said carefully. "But the assets? Leora, there's a lien alert. A big one. It spooked our finance department. Even if Frank hadn't stormed in here, corporate might have kicked back the lease application anyway." Leora had sat there stunned. A lien that didn't make sense. The land was paid for. The equipment was old, but paid for. Frank preached about ownership like it was a religion. "Maybe it's a mistake," she had said. "Identity theft or something." Rick had just nodded, but his eyes said he didn't believe it. "Maybe. Just check on it, Leora. For your own sake." Now bouncing over the hard ruts of the cornfield, that conversation played on a loop in her head. A lien. What had Frank done? Crack. The sound was like a gunshot, loud enough to be heard over the engine roar. The Steiger lurched violently to the left. The steering wheel spun wildly in Leora's hands, snapping her wrist back with painful force. The horizon tilted. The massive tractor groaned metal, shearing against metal, and then came to a shuddering, grinding halt. Silence followed, save for the hissing of steam and the tick-tick-tick of cooling metal. Leora sat frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. She killed the engine. The silence of the field rushed in, heavy with the sound of insects. She climbed down from the cab, her legs shaking. She walked around to the rear axle. The sight made her stomach turn. The main rear axle housing had sheared completely. The massive dual tires were splayed out at an impossible angle like the broken leg of a horse. Hydraulic fluid was pooling rapidly in the dust, turning the grey earth into black sludge. It wasn't just a breakdown. It was a catastrophic structural failure. The iron tomb had finally collapsed. Leora stared at the wreckage. This was a $20,000 repair minimum. Parts would have to be sourced from a salvage yard, because Case didn't make them anymore. It would take weeks. The harvest window was 3 weeks away. Without this tractor to prep the ground and pull the grain carts, they were dead in the water. She pulled out her phone to call Frank. She wanted to scream, "I told you so." She wanted to drag him out here and make him look at the pool of oil. But as she dialed, she looked at the black fluid soaking into the ground. A lean alert. She ended the call before it connected. She wasn't going to call him for help. She was going to find out the truth. Leora walked the 2 miles back to the farmhouse. The heat was punishing, but she didn't feel it. She was propelled by a cold, focused fury. When she reached the yard, she saw Frank's truck was gone. It was Monday afternoon, which meant he was likely at the local diner for the farmers' round table, where the old men of the county drank coffee and complained about the government. Perfect. She entered the house, bypassing the kitchen and heading straight for the office. The room was dark, the blinds still drawn against the sun. It smelled of old dust and Frank's cigar smoke. The desk was a fortress. Frank guarded it jealously. He never let Leora look at the main checkbook or the bank correspondence. "I handle the money," he always said. "You handle the dirt." Leora sat in his chair. It creaked the leather, worn smooth by decades of his weight. She tried the top drawer. Locked. She wasn't surprised. She reached under the lip of the desk, feeling for the spare key he had taped there when she was 10 years old. It was still there. Creatures of habit, she thought bitterly. She unlocked the drawer and pulled it open. It was a mess. Usually Frank was organized, but this drawer was a chaotic jumble of receipts, napkins with scribbled numbers, and unopened envelopes. Leora began to sift through them. Electric bill overdue. Seed bill past due second notice. Diesel supplier COD only, stamped in red ink. Leora's hands trembled. This was impossible. The harvest last year had been decent. Prices were high. Where did the money go? She dug deeper, reaching the back of the drawer. There, buried under a stack of old almanacs, was a thick manila envelope from the First National Bank of Nebraska. It was dated 2 years ago. She opened it. It was a loan agreement, a secure line of credit for $400,000. Leora scanned the document, her eyes widening. The collateral listed wasn't equipment. It was the land. Section 4 and Section 5, the heart of the farm, the ground her grandfather had bought during the Depression. Purpose of loan investment capital. Investment, Frank didn't invest. He stuffed cash in a mattress, metaphorically speaking. She found another envelope, this one from a brokerage firm in Chicago. She opened it and felt the blood drain from her face. Statements. Monthly statements for a commodities trading account. She saw the transactions. Short live cattle. Loss $45,000. Long corn futures. Loss $62,000. Leveraged soybeans. Loss $110,000. The dates corresponded with the loan. Frank bored or desperate, or perhaps trying to prove he was smarter than the market, had leveraged the farm to play the futures market. And he had lost. He had lost everything. She found the most recent letter, the one Frank had crumpled up the day she ordered the tractors. It was a notice of default. Mr. Blackwood, despite repeated attempts to restructure your debt, you are now 90 days past due. The bank is initiating foreclosure proceedings on the collateralized parcels, Section 4 and 5. You have 30 days to cure the default before the auction process begins. Leora dropped the letter. It fluttered to the desk like a dead leaf. The tractors. He hadn't cancelled them because he was stubborn. He cancelled them because the bank would have seen the credit inquiry and accelerated the foreclosure. He was trying to keep the wolves at the door by staying invisible. He bet the farm, Leora whispered to the empty room. He literally bet the farm. The sound of a truck door slamming outside made her jump. Heavy boots crunched on the gravel. The front door opened. Leora didn't move. She sat in the high-backed chair. The evidence of his betrayal spread out before her like a coroner's report. Frank walked into the office. He looked tired. His skin was a greyish colour, contrasting with the dark circles under his eyes. He was holding a styrofoam cup of coffee. He stopped when he saw her. He saw the open drawer. He saw the Chicago brokerage statements fanned out on the desk. The silence that stretched between them was thick enough to choke on. "Leora," he rasped. His voice was weak, lacking the thunder it usually held. "You lost it," Leora said. She didn't shout. Her voice was flat dead. "Section 4 and 5, Grandpa's land. You gambled it away on cattle futures." Frank walked over to the guest chair and sank into it. He didn't argue. He didn't yell. He just looked small. "I thought I could double it," he muttered, looking at the floor. The market. The chart said cattle was going to crash. I was sure of it. "I wanted to leave you with cash, Leora, not just dirt. I wanted to give you a nest egg so you didn't have to struggle like I did. You lied to me," Leora said, tears finally spilling over. "For 2 years, you watched me bust my back working this ground planning for the future, talking about efficiency. And you knew. You knew none of it mattered, because the bank owns it." "I was going to fix it," Frank said, a desperate edge creeping into his voice. "This harvest. If we get a bumper crop, if prices hold, I can pay the arrears, I can stop the auction." "With what?" Leora stood up, slamming the notice of default down in front of him. "With what equipment Frank the Steiger just snapped its axle in the south quarter. It's dead. The transmission is sheared. We have no tractor. We have no credit to rent one. We have a foreclosure notice in 3 weeks." Frank's face went white. "The Steiger is down. It's catastrophic," Leora said. "We are finished. You finished us." Frank tried to stand up. I can fix it. I can weld it. I just need—" He cut off with a sharp gasp. His hand flew to his chest, clutching the plaid fabric of his shirt. "Frank tore." Leora's anger vanished in a split second, replaced by cold fear. Frank's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His face contorted in agony, turning a terrifying shade of red, then purple. He swayed his knees, buckling. "Dad!" Leora screamed. She lunged across the desk, but she was too slow. Frank Blackwood, the Iron Man of the county, collapsed onto the dusty floor of his office, the brokerage statements fluttering down around him like confetti at a twisted celebration. Leora dropped to her knees beside him, her hands shaking as she fumbled for her phone to dial 911. "Dad, breathe! Don't you dare die on me now! You don't get to leave this mess! Breathe!" But Frank's eyes were rolling back, his breath coming in shallow, rattling gasps. The secrets he had carried were heavy, but the heart failure they had caused was heavier. As the operator answered, Leora looked at the letters on the desk, the proof of a legacy destroyed, and realized that the tractors were the least of their problems. The engine of the family had just quit, and she was the only one left to steer the wreck. The waiting room of the County General Hospital smelled of antiseptic and stale popcorn. It was 3 a.m. on Tuesday. Leora sat in a vinyl chair that stuck to her legs, her phone clutched in her hand like a lifeline. Frank was alive. That was the good news. He had suffered a massive myocardial infarction, a widowmaker in common parlance. The doctors had placed 2 stents in his blocked arteries. He was sedated in the ICU machine, breathing for him tubes, snaking out of his arms like the hydraulic lines of the machines he loved more than people. Leora hadn't slept in 20 hours. Her eyes burned, but her mind was racing at 1,000 miles an hour. An hour ago, while Frank was in surgery, Leora had stepped outside to take a call. It wasn't a well-wisher. It was Mr. Henderson, the vice president of the First National Bank. He had heard the scanner traffic. In a small town, news of a heart attack travels faster than light. Leora, Henderson had said, his voice dripping with faux concern. I'm terribly sorry about Frank, but given the situation and the notice of default that matured yesterday, the bank has to protect its assets. We're freezing the operating accounts effective immediately until probate or power of attorney is established. He's not dead, Henderson, Leora had snapped. You can't freeze us out in the middle of harvest prep. We can and we have. We're sending an appraiser out Thursday to value the equipment for the auction. We have a buyer interested in the land, a developer from Omaha, a developer. They were going to pave Blackwood Acres and turn it into a subdivision. Leora hung up. She was cornered. She had no tractor. She had no money. She had a father in a coma and a bank ready to sell the ground out from under them in 48 hours. She walked back into the ICU and stood over Frank. He looked frail without his bluster. His hands, usually clenched in fists, were open and limp. You stubborn old fool, she whispered, tears tracking through the dust on her face. You dug this hole, and then you checked out. She left the hospital at dawn. She drove back to the farm, the rising sun illuminating the fields of corn. They were tall, green, and heavy with ears. It was a bumper crop. The cruel irony was that the land had produced its best yield in years, but they had no way to harvest it, and no way to pay the debt to keep it. When she pulled into the driveway, she saw a truck parked near the machine shed. It wasn't the bank. It was a sleek black pickup truck with chrome rims. A man was walking around the broken Steiger, inspecting the sheared axle with a critical eye. Leora slammed her truck door and marched over. Get off the property. Unless you have a warrant, you're trespassing. The man turned around. It was Kevin Miller. Kevin was 35, the owner of Miller Ag Services. He was everything Frank despised, young, flashy, and heavily leveraged. He ran a custom harvesting crew that moved from Texas to the Dakotas every year. He farmed with brand-new Case YH quad tracks and managed everything from an iPad. Frank called him a corporate farmer. Easy, Leora, Kevin said, holding up his hands. He wore a clean trucker hat and designer boots. I heard about Frank. I wanted to see if the rumors were true. That we're broke, that my dad is dying. Take your pick. Kevin kicked the tire of the broken Steiger. I heard the Iron Tomb finally gave up the ghost. Snapped axle housing. That's a nasty break. You can't fix that in the field. I know I can't, Leora said bitterly. So unless you're here to gloat, get lost, Kevin. I have a bank auction to prepare for. Kevin looked at her, his expression shifting from curiosity to calculation. I'm not here to gloat. I'm here to make a deal. We have no money for custom harvesting, Kevin. The accounts are frozen. I don't want cash, Kevin said. He looked out at the corn. I've been watching this crop. It's the best in the county. Frank, for all his faults, knows how to grow corn. That field right there, that's running 250 bushels an acre easy. So, Kevin stepped closer. My crew is finishing up the section over by the highway. We have a 3-day gap before we head north to the Dakotas. I have 4 combines and 3 grain carts sitting idle. Leora crossed her arms. And I'll harvest it, Kevin said. All 4,000 acres. I'll bring the whole fleet. We knock it out in 4 days. For free, you're not a charity, Kevin. No. Kevin grinned a sharp, shark-like grin. Not for free. For 40%. 40%, Leora balked. Standard rate is hardly a fraction of that. You want almost half the crop. I want 40% of the profit after the elevator check clears, Kevin corrected. And I want the lease rights to Section 6 next year. Section 6 was the river-bottom ground, the most fertile soil they owned. Frank would shoot you, Leora said. Frank isn't here, Kevin pointed out softly. You are. And here is the reality, Leora. The bank is coming Thursday. If that corn is still standing in the field, they appraise it as unharvested crop at a discount rate auction, the land, and you walk away with zero. If the corn is in the bin by Thursday, you have a check, a tangible asset. You can pay the arrears, stop the foreclosure, and fight another day. Leora looked at the broken tractor. She looked at the empty driveway where the John Deeres should have been. She looked at the farmhouse where her father's legacy was currently gathering dust. She realized then that the John Deere dream was just that, a dream. She didn't need to own the equipment to be a farmer. She needed to get the job done. Frank's obsession with ownership had killed the farm. Leora's obsession with management had to save it. 30%, Leora counted. And a 2-year lease on Section 6, not ownership. Kevin paused. He looked at the sky, checking the weather. 35. And you buy dinner for my crew every night. Leora extended her hand. It was covered in grease from the door handle. Deal. When can you start? Kevin shook her hand. Boys are already fueling up. We roll in an hour. The next 72 hours blurred into a singular exhaust fumes-filled nightmare. Blackwood Acres, usually a quiet cathedral of slow, methodical work, was transformed into a war zone of high-speed efficiency. Kevin Miller didn't lie. At 10 a.m. sharp, a convoy of massive red Case 1H combines rolled down the driveway, their headers wide enough to take up both lanes of the county road. Grain carts followed, pulling alongside the combines, without them ever stopping a ballet of heavy machinery that Frank would have hated simply because it wasn't his. Leora didn't sit in an office. She drove the semi-trucks. She hauled load after load to the grain elevator in town, running on lukewarm gas station coffee and pure adrenaline. Every time she weighed in at the elevator, the ticket printer spat out a number that made her heart soar. The yield wasn't just good. It was historic. The drought had decimated the neighbors, but Frank's obsessive deep tillage years ago had allowed the roots to tap into the subsoil moisture. The old man's stubbornness had actually done one thing right. By Wednesday night, the north sections were bare stubble. The bins were full. On Thursday morning, the day the bank appraiser was due, the final acre of corn was cut. Leora stood on the porch, watching the last combine fold up its auger. She held a stack of weigh tickets in her hand, her knuckles white. She did the math on her phone one last time. Even after giving Kevin his 35%, cut the check from the elevator would be enough. They weren't rich. They were back to zero. But they still owned the dirt. A black sedan pulled into the yard, kicking up dust. It was Henderson from the bank, accompanied by a man with a clipboard. Henderson stepped out, adjusting his tie, looking ready to deliver a eulogy for the farm. He stopped when he saw the empty fields. He stopped when he saw the massive fleet of combines parked in a neat row, Kevin's crew washing them down. Leora walked down the steps to meet him. She didn't look like a victim. She was covered in dust. Her eyes were red-rimmed, but her back was straight. "Mr. Henderson," she said, her voice cutting through the morning air like a whip. "Leora." Henderson stammered, looking at the harvested field in confusion. We were coming to inspect the standing crop for the asset seizure." "There is no crop," Leora said, holding up the elevator receipts. "It's all in the elevator, sold on a forward contract as of this morning." She handed him a folded piece of paper. It was a certified proof of funds from the grain merchandiser. "This covers the default amount, the $400,000 arrears, plus interest, and your exorbitant late fees," Leora said coldly. "The wire transfer will hit your bank tomorrow. If you set one foot on this property with an auctioneer, I will sue you for harassment and interference with business operations." Henderson looked at the paper, then at Leora. He realized the commission he was hoping to make on the land sale had just evaporated. "Very well," he said, his lips thin. "We'll process the payment." 2 weeks later, Frank came home. He was thinner, weaker, and walked with a cane. Leora drove him from the hospital in silence. When they pulled into the yard, Frank looked around. He saw the empty fields. He saw the iron tomb, the broken Steiger, sitting on blocks, stripped of its wheels. He sat on the porch swing, the effort of walking exhausting him. Leora handed him a glass of iced tea. "You got it out," Frank said. It wasn't a question. "I did. I hired Kevin Miller." Frank stiffened. "Miller, that flashy boy. You let him run his red paint on my ground. He saved us, Dad," Leora said, sitting on the railing facing him. "I gave him 35% and a lease on Section 6. Frank's face flushed red. "You gave away Section 6. Leora, have you lost your mind?" "I saved the farm." Leora's voice finally rose, cracking with the emotion she had held back. "I saved your legacy. You gambled it away on cattle futures. You lied to me for 2 years. You tried to hide a foreclosure by cancelling the John Deeres I ordered. You almost died, and you almost took this family down with you." Frank fell silent. The wind rustled the dry leaves of the oak tree. He looked at the land he had fought for, and he looked at his daughter. She was tougher than him. She was smarter than him. "You are retired," Leora said firmly. "For real this time. I'm running the operation. We are selling the Steiger for scrap. We aren't buying the John Deeres either. We're going to contract the heavy work out. We're going to run this like a business, not a museum." Frank took a sip of tea. His hand shook slightly. 35%, huh? "Yeah. Miller usually charges 40. You talked him down." "I did." A small, reluctant smile cracked Frank's weathered face. "All right then. All right." It wasn't an apology. Men like Frank Blackwood didn't apologize. But it was a surrender. The tractors never came, but Leora had saved the only thing that mattered. Leora never got her 2 brand-new John Deere 8Rs. The shiny green paint never rolled down the driveway. But in the end, she got something more valuable, the truth, the reins of the kingdom, and the respect of a father who finally realized he wasn't the only one who could drive a tractor. The iron tomb was sold for scrap, but the farm lived on, proving that sometimes you have to let the old ways break down completely before you can build something that lasts. If you enjoyed this story of betrayal, high-stakes farming, and family redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Have you ever had to make a tough decision that went against your parents' wishes? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss another real-life drama story. Thanks for watching.